subject to sudden violent windstorms. So Jesus is trying to get them to get in their boat, because obviously they're probably just in like a little John boat, something we'd call like a John boat. It's nothing like some big yacht or anything. It could very easily probably get tossed around by waves. So he's trying to get them to go on. So he sent them on their way. He dismissed the crowd. Jesus, we kind of always talk about him being with big crowds and teaching and preaching and, wanting to do that. But, Jesus was a human as well. He needed some alone time sometimes. He needed some me time, just like we all do. So he was kind of ready for them to go on. And he just kind of wanted to pray and rest before he went and rejoined his disciples. So he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray, and he often prayed to restore his strength and spiritual vitality. And, I thought about, like, wow, what if we did that? A lot of times we tend to just pray for, something or someone or something that's going on. But, what if we really spent that time in prayer to really kind of restore our strength, restore our spiritual vitality? We don't know what Jesus was talking about. There's nothing that goes into what he was praying to his Father about. It's probably a very personal conversation. But in any case, he was there kind of throughout the night, way late into the night. The disciples did as they had been told, and so they rode it says, a considerable distance. And in John, when John recounts this story in John 6, he says they were 25 to 30 stadia, which from the shore. So that means they had gone about 3 or 4 miles in a way that we would understand it. So they had gone a pretty good distance. And then all of a sudden, as it says, the Sea of Galilee was kind of subject to these violent windstorms. All of a sudden, a strong wind blew up because the waves arose. The boat was buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. But they were kind of stuck, like they were just out there in this really kind of being tormented by this high surf. And then this is where the miracle happened. And so, can you imagine being in this little boat and out in the water? And I mean, I've been on a cruise ship where I was scared to death that there was going to be a storm. I can't even imagine being in this little tiny boat, several of us. And, they're probably very scared. They're very worried about what's going to happen to them. And so then something very strange happened. And, we've all heard this story several times. And it says that it was probably between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., so it was still very dark. So the disciples were probably a little bit disoriented. It's dark, can't see as well. And also you've just gone through this storm, and so you're kind of still, a little bit fearful. They were kind of worried about they were fearing for their lives. And so they were kind of just, all over the place. And that was when Jesus kind of got up and just started walking on the water, just like if I were to walk across this room. He just got up and went. Matthew, the other gospel writers who recount this story, they make no attempt to explain how Jesus did this impossible thing. That just showed that his walking on the water showed that he was the Messiah, Lord of over all creation, and even that the wind and the sea obeyed him. They say, their thoughts are, there's no reason to try to explain what's happening. Like, it's just because he is the Messiah. But thinking about if you're in this boat and there's this huge storm and you've been worried, it's dark, and all of a sudden you see something that looks like it's walking on water, you'd probably be a little bit fearful. You'd probably be like these men who kind of cried out in fear. So given this situation, it's no surprise that they were terrified, and they even thought they saw a ghost. And so, that's kind of where they're at. They're seeing it now. So Jesus directed his disciples to get in the boat and cross to the other side, even though he knew a storm was brewing. Jesus knew what he was doing. He knew he was sending them out and that a storm was going to come. This is a good reminder for us. God's will and direction may lead us into a storm. There's many times where, you're kind of walking into something that is going to be hard to deal with, but sometimes that's where God leads you. But Jesus will use whatever means necessary to make us more like himself. This became a strong faith-building moment for the disciples, but they would have missed it if they were unwilling to be obedient. So, that's kind of the first thing, is that if the disciples hadn't have been obedient, we wouldn't have had, what happens next and what happens throughout this story and how it tells us about faith. In that next set of verses, we'll kind of see that real fear will set in when we take our eyes off Jesus. So, Laura, if you'll read that second set of verses.
But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me."
All right. So I thought this was kind of interesting. So in Mark's account of this story, it says that Jesus actually intended to just walk on past them. He was just going to walk to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, where he needed to be at. But then he kind of noticed that the men were looking fearful. They were crying out. So he kind of, he was like, oh, I know what they're thinking. So he immediately said directly to them, calling out across the way, he said, "Take courage." Like, I know you're scared, but don't, but take courage. He wanted to assure them that he was not a ghost or an apparition like they feared. He then identified himself and reiterated his comforting statement, "It is I, don't be afraid." And so when he uses that, "It is I," he's literally saying, "I am." And that's the same identification that he uses kind of throughout the New Testament to assert his divine nature. In John, Jesus kind of regularly uses this phrase. So, he even though they're scared, he says, "It's me. Don't be afraid. It's me. I know this." I don't know if he used the word weird, but he probably, I know this looks crazy or weird, but it's me, and I'm showing you that I'm the Messiah. But with it being dark, you would question that. Even if, it is somebody that or that you recognize, you may still question what's going on here. So Peter was kind of known for acting impetuously. So when he heard this ghostly figure's voice through the haze, claiming to be Jesus, he instantly reacted, and he says, "Lord, if it's you." And this is where he says, tell me I can come walk on that water. So did Peter know that it was indeed Jesus approaching the boat? So it seems, but he needed to find out for certain. There's some of us that I can be a little bit this way. You can tell me something, but I have to see it for myself, or you have to prove it to me a lot of times. So that's kind of what Peter's saying. He's saying, prove it to me. I think it's you. It sounds like you. It looks like you, but I want you to prove to me that it's you. So he said, I challenged Jesus, "Tell me to come to you on the water." Peter must have believed that if a person walking on the sea was indeed Jesus, then he could transfer the power to do likewise on him. Together, they would walk to the shore, or so he thought. And so to his surprise, the Lord quickly answered, and he probably said, "Come." It says that he probably put out his hand, "Come." And so Peter carefully climbs over the edge of the boat, probably expecting to just fall straight into the water, but then he steps on the waves. And it doesn't say how far he went. And so, at this point, Peter's been, they're scared, but Peter decides to have the courage to actually step out and listen to Jesus. And he started walking towards him, and at this point, he's looking straight at Jesus. He's not looking down. His eyes were fixed on the Lord as he slowly ambled toward him. And that's the part, that we have to remember when we are in these fearful situations, or we're in something that we're uncomfortable with, or we're kind of in a situation that God has put us in, that as long as we keep our eyes fixed on him, things will go as they should. Just like Peter, as long as he looked at Jesus, he was walking on that water. He was not sinking. But then things kind of went a little sideways for Peter, as we know. And just for a moment, he took his eyes off Jesus and started looking around at his circumstances. I mean, he's walking on water. There's like a storm going on. And he kind of became aware of what was going on around him. And so then he became afraid. And in that instant, Peter must have realized that what he was doing was impossible by any measure of logic or reason. Immediately, he began to sink down into the waves. And then he had to turn back to Jesus, and he had to cry out in desperation, "Lord, save me," which is obviously very natural. That would be a very natural reaction for us. So Peter's fright was natural. Fear sets in when people take their eyes off Christ and allow life circumstances to beleaguer them. So long as Peter kept his focus on Jesus and the power he knew Jesus possessed, he was able to accomplish an incredible feat. But when he let his surroundings take his attention away from the Lord, he sank like a rock. We all have our own raging seas of circumstances to sail above. But when we keep our spiritual eyes focused on Jesus, we will not be battered about by the constantly changing currents of this life. We can also courageously accomplish great things for God's kingdom. So, I feel like I kind of keep on saying this over and over again, but as long as we keep our eyes, on Jesus, as long as we go to him in prayer and we talk to him and we try to find out what his plan for us, and we don't look around at what's going on around us about things that are happening that could affect what we're trying to do or what he has set out for us to do, then we can accomplish anything, accomplish the impossible, just like Peter was doing. But as soon as we kind of look away, or we try to start trying to cater to the world, or we get worried about what somebody's thinking about what we're doing, or how what I'm doing is going to affect someone else, then that's when things can kind of go awry for us. But in the next set of verses, we'll see that Jesus will always be there when we decide to return to him. So, Stephen, if you'll read that last set of verses for us.
Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God."
All right. So, kind of just like I just said, whenever we might look away, we might lose sight for a few minutes. But as soon as we are ready to go back to Jesus, he's waiting right there for us. As soon as Peter reached up and said, "Jesus, save me," he immediately reached out his hand and pulled him back into the boat. And they went, and it actually says he gently lifted Peter back above the waves, and they headed back to the boat. So, they walked back to the boat on the water because Peter had put his sight back on Jesus. And it says that maybe Jesus was kind of joking a little bit with Peter and kind of a rhetorical question, and he said, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" That famous verse we talk about a lot. And it says, this question conveys the sense of, if you had enough faith and did not doubt, you could have continued to walk on the water. So, Jesus is just saying, if you have enough faith, you could do anything. And we've heard a lot of times, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to the mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." And I think it's good to point out that Jesus wasted no time in calming the fears and rescuing those in need of help. He didn't let Peter know all of the ways that he had fallen short before he extended his hand out. He just stepped in quickly and caught hold of Peter when he cried out. So he didn't tell, what's a good word? He didn't get on him for not having enough faith. He didn't tell him all the ways he had fallen short before he reached down and grabbed him. And when we go back to Jesus, he's not going to do that. He's just going to be there waiting to pull us back up to whatever for whatever he needs us for. So Jesus made good use of this event to teach Peter and his other disciples a valuable lesson. The reason Peter had failed was that he still lacked adequate faith to trust Jesus to do the impossible. We, like Peter, tend to take bold steps of faith until the going gets tough. Then we, also like Peter, waver in our trust in God's ability to accomplish his purposes in our lives. When we find ourselves being pulled down by the strong undercurrents of modern life, we can follow Peter's example and call out to God. We can turn in faith and trust Jesus to come to our rescue. When Jesus and Peter got into the boat, another miracle happened. The wind died down. The disciples were once more made aware of the divine power that Jesus wields. Jesus demonstrated his lordship over the natural order. In an earlier case, they had wondered, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. At this point, they no longer just speculated about who he was. They worshiped him, saying, for the first time, truly, you are the Son of God. So, several things had happened to show that Jesus was the Son of God, but this was the thing that this kind of answered their question. It cemented it for them that he was truly the Son of God. Jesus' disciples were finally coming to the realization that Jesus was more than a mere human being. Later, Peter would expand upon this confession. But what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus declared that upon that confession, he would build his church and that nothing, not even the gates of Hades, could prevail against it. The disciples worshiped Jesus because he was greater than the obstacle before them, and they recognized that fear doesn't reign when Jesus is in the mix. It's no different for us. We can't help but worship Jesus when we see him for who he truly is. We can stand courageously without fear because he is with us, and he is greater than all. Then in conclusion, it says, in Jesus, we can overcome whatever obstacle may come our way. Consider the obstacles you face as opportunities for Jesus to reveal his glory to you. How will you courageously follow Jesus? Pray. Identify those that you might find intimidating or scary about following Christ in faith. Pray and ask God to strengthen your faith and trust in him. Speak. It takes courage to talk to someone about forgiveness or to exhort someone to repent and come to Christ. Identify someone you need to talk with, pray for the opportunity, and courageously trust God to lead you in that conversation. Go. One of the scariest steps I've ever taken was to step out of my comfort zone and go on a mission trip. Talk to your church leaders about opportunities to go and serve Christ courageously for a week, 2 weeks, or a lifetime. Courage is jumping even in the face of fear. Jesus' disciples in Matthew 14 had an opportunity to exhibit such courage, and we do too. The key is fixing our eyes on Jesus, trusting that he will do what only he can do. Does anyone have anything to add? All right, let us pray. God, just thank you for giving us courage in fearful situations, God, giving us someone that we can look toward, God, and to lead us in the right direction even when things are uncomfortable or scary, God. But also, God, just knowing that even if sometimes we do lose sight of you, God, that that you'll be right there as soon as we turn back around and realize that we really do need you, God, to get through whatever we've got going on, that you'll be right there, God, to pull us back up. Just be with us as we go throughout the week, God, and just help us to face these scary situations, God, and to make sure that our eyes are always